A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen here. Thank you very much for waiting. Apologies for the delay, but the meeting has just got over, followed by the dinner, which Prime Minister just returned back to the hotel. We are very happy to join you today evening in Tokyo to brief you about this very important visit Prime Minister has been undertaking to Japan for the Quad Summit, as well as for the bilateral meeting and other meetings that he has had, to give us a sense of the conversations that have taken place and the agenda that was discussed. We have with us Foreign Secretary Sir Vinay Quatra. We also have on the dais our ambassador to Japan, Shri Sanjay Kumar Verma, and joining us are additional secretaries Vani Rao as well as Naveen Srivastav, looking after East Asia and America's division in the Ministry of External Affairs. I would request Foreign Secretary to make an opening remarks explaining what all has happened during this last couple of days of the visit, and then we'll take a few questions. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, and very good evening, and namaskar to all of you here who are present here for this briefing. Ambassador Sanjay Verma, Additional Secretaries Ms. Vani Rao, Naveen, our spokesperson. I think the last 2 days have been extremely important in terms of what the Prime Minister's engagement in Japan have entailed. Prime Minister Modi has just concluded his official visit to Japan over the last 2 days, and he was here to participate in the 3rd Quad Leaders Summit in Tokyo at the invitation of Prime Minister of Japan, His Excellency Kishida. In addition to participating in the Quad Summit, Prime Minister held bilateral meetings with the President of US and the Prime Ministers of Japan and Australia. Those were earlier today. Let me first begin with the Quad Leaders Summit. I must mention up front that there was an excellent rapport and warmth between the leaders during the summit, and they all had productive and meaningful discussions that were marked by cooperative and constructive agenda and a very, very positive approach to the discussions. The continuing and common priorities of Quad cooperation have already been captured in the joint statement that is available in the public domain. Let me simply underscore some of the key elements of the conversation among the Quad leaders, and these have also been highlighted by Prime Minister Shri Modi during deliberations of the Quad Summit also. First, action-oriented cooperation among Quad partners, as also between the Quad partners and the countries of the Indo-Pacific for free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific, aimed at peace, stability and prosperity in the region. Discussions during the summit were focused on mutually beneficial consultations, and as I said, agenda was constructive and the tone positive. 2. Support for ASEAN unity and centrality as the Quad and the countries in the Indo-Pacific pursue their shared goals in the region. 3. Focus on common efforts to respond on COVID-19, including in particular the post-pandemic recovery and strengthening of health security and health-related infrastructure. 4th, work together to promote infrastructure delivery, as also efforts to bridge the infrastructural gaps in the Indo-Pacific region, and do it in a manner that does not burden the countries of the region with unsustainable debt and unsustainable infrastructure projects. Fifthly, the Quad leaders also welcomed a new Indo-Pacific partnership in maritime domain awareness, a regional initiative to help the countries bolster their capabilities to respond to humanitarian and natural disasters, as also to combat illegal fishing. Next, shape and build partnership for greater cybersecurity and for transparent, trusted and reliable supply chains across the region, including in particular in the field of critical and emerging technologies. Quad leaders also issued strong condemnation of all forms of terrorism and a call for expeditiously bringing to justice the perpetrators of the Mumbai and Pathankot terror attacks. Also, coordinate more effectively and timely responses to the humanitarian assistance, disaster relief incidences in the region in future through the agreed Quad HADR guidelines. Prime Ministers also participated in the formal launch of the Quad STEM Fellowship, which will be offered to 25 students from each of the Quad countries. Prime Minister, towards the end of the Quad Summit deliberations, also put forward specific proposals that could contribute to guiding the Quad agenda in months and years ahead. Some of these proposals include: 1. Need to take solid initiatives on the field of climate finance and sustainable developments. 2. Emphasized on the importance of building appropriate platforms for the industry and businesses in the Quad countries and between the Quad countries and the Indo-Pacific countries to forge partnerships in the field of critical and emerging technologies. And 3. Informal and formal mechanisms to strengthen partnership among the like-minded countries in the areas of common interest. As I mentioned upfront in the beginning, besides participating in the Quad Summit, Prime Minister also held bilateral meetings with President Biden, President Kishida, and Prime Minister of Australia. Prime Minister Kishida and Prime Minister of Australia. First, with regard to the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. The two leaders appreciated the importance and need of regular interactions between the top leaders of the two countries. The meeting was warm and substantive, and also a very important opportunity to discuss significant areas of our bilateral engagement and also the important regional and global issues. They also reiterated their shared commitment to maintaining a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. Prime Minister Modi and President Biden welcomed the signing of the Investment Incentive Agreement that happened yesterday. This agreement will boost investment by the US Development Finance Corporation in sectors of mutual priority. You would perhaps be aware, DFC's current portfolio in India amounts to investment of around $4 billion. We understand it has also planned investment of around additional $1 billion in sectors like renewable energy, supply chain diversification, agriculture, MSME financing infrastructure, and healthcare projects. Prime Minister Shri Modi welcomed participation of US industry in the Indian defense manufacturing under the Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat program. A new initiative for critical and emerging technologies, ICET, was launched to forge collaborations, including with the participation of government, industry, and other stakeholders on both sides in this very important area of critical and newly emerging technologies. As I mentioned earlier, both leaders reiterated their shared commitment to free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. Yesterday, the Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi also attended the launch of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework of Prosperity, along with the President of US and Prime Minister of Japan, Shri Kishida. A joint statement has also been issued to underline the vision and key elements envisaged in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework are already available in the public domain. I would simply mention that the IPF framework is structured around 4 pillars, and these are currently being negotiated among the Quad countries. And these 4 pillars are: 1, relating to trade; 2, supply chains; 3, infrastructure, clean energy and decarbonization; and 4, tax and anti-corruption. Collective discussions, as I mentioned, under these pillars will be initiated following the launch of this framework, and the following final contours of this would emerge based on discussions among the Quad countries. During his bilateral meeting with Excellency Prime Minister Kishida of Japan, both leaders undertook a comprehensive stock-taking of the entire framework of bilateral partnership to carry forward our cooperation in diverse areas, including in the field of defense manufacturing in India, a skill development partnership, trade and technology partnership, cooperation including for resilient supply chains in the region and other areas. This is Honorable Prime Minister Modi's 5th visit to Japan since becoming Prime Minister and his second meeting with Excellency the Prime Minister of Japan. Prime Minister Kishida has invited Prime Minister Shri Modi to visit Japan later this year for the annual summit. In fact, during the summit, both Prime Ministers underscored the importance of maintaining the momentum of regular high-level exchanges between the two countries. Earlier during the day today, Prime Minister Shri Modi also met in reflection of the importance attached by Japan to India-Japan ties. He also met with 3 former Japanese Prime Ministers, including Excellency Mr. Suga, Excellency Mr. Yoshihiro Mori, and Mr. Shinzo Abe, who, as you know, are also the key leadership of the Japan-India Association. Prime Minister Shri Modi and former Prime Minister Shri Abe, they share a good rapport over long years of interaction. They, I'm told, we met 15 times as Prime Ministers. In 2014, during their annual summit, ties were upgraded to a special, strategic and global partnership. The Japan-India Association itself has been instrumental in promoting people-to-people ties and economic linkages between the two countries. To deepen the link between a stronger and wider India-Japan commercial partnership in a manner that clearly has a link with India's trade, technology, investment and development priorities, Prime Minister Shri Modi held extensive and a wide-ranging interaction and discussions with the leaders of Japanese business and industry yesterday. Yesterday, in addition, Prime Minister also had a very vibrant and robust interaction with Indian diaspora in Tokyo. Prime Minister Shri Modi also held a bilateral meeting with the Australian Prime Minister, His Excellency Mr. Anthony Albanese, earlier today afternoon, of course on the sidelines of the Quad Leaders Summit. Prime Minister congratulated the Australian Prime Minister for his election victory, and both leaders reviewed the multifaceted cooperation between the two countries under the framework of comprehensive strategic partnership that includes important areas of trade and investment, defense manufacturing, renewable energy, in particular the green hydrogen, education, science and technology, in particular the new and emerging areas of technology, agricultural research, sports, and people-to-people ties between the two countries. Both Prime Ministers affirmed their desire to continue the positive momentum in the bilateral relationship. Prime Minister Modi extended an invitation to his Australian counterpart to visit India at an early date. I would stop here and would be happy to take a few questions that might be there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Before I take questions, just the ground rules. Please identify yourself and the organization that you represent. Also keep your questions very, very sharp. I saw Madhav there, please.
And limited to the topic.
Yeah, that of course. And please limit it to the visit of the Prime Minister here. Yeah, Madhav, the floor is yours.
Sir, a sensational claim being made by Japan.
Could I have your
Yeah,
name?
Madhav from Times Now.
Yes.
Sir, a sensational claim being made by Japan. They've said that China and Russia had joint military exercises in the northeastern part of Asia, even as the Quad summit was underway, where military jets, fighter jets were flown. Do you see this as some kind of a deliberate positioning on part of China and Russia? Because all of this has happened while the summit was underway. And clearly the statement also reflects a number of points which would directly reflect on China and Russia. Thank you.
Sure. I think before we go to the next question, let's capture all the China questions in the room first.
Yes, sir.
So let's go one by one and then we'll come back to that in one single shot. Yeah, please.
Sir, Manish Chand, India Rights Network. My question is that, if one studies the joint statement carefully, many of these initiatives and remarks seem to be aimed at China. Clearly, there was a lot of discussion. Could you give a flavor of the discussion on China or China-related activities at the summit beside what is there in the joint statement? And also an infrastructure partnership. $50 billion have been committed. Now, how is this going to be, what about the individual contribution? How is it going to work out? And is it a kind of response to China-led BRI or a similar mode of connectivity? Yeah.
Please.
Naveen.
Sir, I'm Naveen from ANI. My question is, sir, that what is the status now on IPEF? Are we a part of IPEF? Are we negotiating it? Can you give us some more clarity on this, sir?
Okay. Is there anybody
Okay.
else?
Any other linked question which we can capture?
Yeah, please go ahead. That's okay. Go ahead.
Sir, what exactly were things that were Akshay NDTV? What were the things that were mentioned regarding India's handling of COVID? Did President Joe Biden mention that India's handling of COVID was better than China?
I thought you need to take the seat and then I'm happy to give you the floor, Abhishek. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Perhaps the final China
Please
question.
introduce yourself.
I'm Abhishek Kapoor from Republic TV, sir. Perhaps the final China question. Was any defense cooperation or military component within Quad discussed in the context of China? Or is it being conceived at any stage in future?
So I think we'll stop here and give you the floor. And
Yeah.
then, unless it's China related.
Yeah.
Is China related? Okay, then why don't we take that question first?
So, Polemy from India Today. My question is about the response that came in after the launch of the IPEF yesterday from the Chinese foreign minister, where he said that this Indo-Pacific strategy is going to be a failed strategy. I believe it was in the larger context as well around this, the Quad Summit and the IPEF as well, but your response to the same.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think let me just get the last question out of the way. I don't think it's correct for me to what foreign minister of another country says. So I think that's a question which should rather actually pose to them. But I think let me just go back to what I said right in the beginning, that the discussions during the Quad were based on a very constructive and forward-leaning cooperative agenda between the Quad countries, as also between the Quad and the other countries of the Indo-Pacific. Naturally, during the various agenda items of the Quad, the discussions did focus on what could be the way forward for cooperation among the Quad countries. The leaders also discussed the challenges and the opportunities that are there in the Indo-Pacific region. They also looked at how different economic priorities, as I mentioned in my remarks, those relating to the COVID-19 pandemic, the post-COVID recovery, building of health preparedness in terms of health infrastructure so that such pandemics could be fought, were discussed very extensively and discussed in terms of what they can do forward. I think the economic dimension of how the countries of the Indo-Pacific attend to their common needs, build each other's capacities, strengthen the resilience of their economies. How do they shape an agenda of trade, technology and investment that builds the economic capacities and individual economies of Indo-Pacific region is something which is essentially the sum and substance of the Indo-Pacific economic framework. Somebody asked the question whether India has, as you saw, Prime Minister Shri Modi was present at the launch of the IBF, and as I mentioned right in the beginning, the cooperation within the IPF will be structured along 4 of its pillars, and I mentioned those pillars. Now the discussions among the Quad countries will start on these 4 pillars, and based on that they would decide which pillar to progress at what speed, etc. Naturally, this is something in which all the countries which were part of the IPEF launch would be involved in those conversations. I think the question relating to infrastructure, 50 billion plus, how it will work, what will happen. You see, again, I'll refer back to my comments which I said. That the leaders, when they discussed way forward of cooperation within the Quad, as also the challenges. It was mentioned very clearly by the leaders, including in particular by our Prime Minister, that the infrastructure cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, the filling up of the gaps in the infrastructure within the region have to be in a manner that it does not result in unsustainable burden and unsustainable bouquet of projects for the Indo-Pacific. And for this, the Quad countries need to come together. And the figure that you saw is a projected figure. It seeks to kind of contribute assistance. And naturally, that infrastructure cooperation which will flow out of this will precisely address these points, that the projects are sustainable, they are demand driven, they meet the specific needs of the Indo-Pacific country. There was, I don't know, health of COVID. I think I've already answered. Each country in the region has actually responded to their COVID needs in a manner that that they need to respond to within their own national context. But I think there was a clear realization that the countries of the Quad, and this was put forward right at the time of the first COVID summit, which is the Quad Vaccine Initiative, which has evolved since then to include not just COVID vaccines, number one, not just expansion of the basket of vaccine within COVID-19, but three, also aspects relating to building up of health infrastructure, the increase of vaccine manufacturing capacities, including, for example, a particular project in India. All those elements now form part of the Quad's outlook and Quad's approach to the entire question of COVID-19. It, of course, has an element relating to the post-COVID response. I must mention that there was a general appreciation in the Quad's deliberation, including also in a couple of bilateral meetings, of the manner in which India has been able to shape a very comprehensive response to the COVID-19 pandemic in India, which includes all elements of the comprehensively all elements of COVID response, naturally vaccines to start with, but subsequently the health security of the primary healthcare workers, the ones who are in the forefront, etc. Yes, there was a general appreciation, but there was also an understanding that Quad, the countries of the Quad, need to come together to continue to stay prepared as we move along on this matter.
Thank you, sir.
If I may just add, you would also perhaps be aware that Quad countries together came and joined hands in distributing vaccines under the Quad initiative to Thailand and Cambodia. So I'm sure such efforts would continue to take place further. They would probably be expanded to include cooperation on the health infrastructure also, because, as I said, this cooperation will stretch across the entire arc of Indo-Pacific countries, starting from one end to the other. So the vulnerability of each country with regard to COVID would perhaps get addressed as the Quad discusses this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there more questions? Okay. We'll take.
As far as the bilateral with President Biden was concerned, the White House statement mentions the fact that there was some amount of discussion on how to manage the fallout of the conflict in Ukraine in terms of, soaring energy and food prices. Could you just elaborate on what was that aspect of the conversation?
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Sure. Any other such question which we can capture here?
So my question on
we
those
just close?
fighter
Yeah.
jets and
One second.
military exercises.
I thought we've already responded to all the China questions.
So on the exercises,
Well, on the exercises is not the Quad exercises, it's China's exercises. So you need to go and
Manish.
ask them there. But I think,
One second.
I think just to put that to rest, as I mentioned to you, the discussion agenda was constructive and cooperative and forward-leaning in that sense. As I said, they did discuss challenges and opportunities that are there in the Indo-Pacific. But specific actions of a particular thing is something which which would appear perhaps in bilateral discussions individually. But Quad was focused on their forward-leaning partnerships.
Before you, Manish, somebody hasn't asked a question. Please introduce yourself.
मेरा नाम आरेंद्र है, मैं डीडी न्यूज से हूँ। सर, ऑस्ट्रेलिया के प्रधानमंत्री से प्रधानमंत्री मोदी की ये पहली मुलाकात थी। किस तरीके से इस मुलाकात में बातचीत हुई और क्या महत्वपूर्ण रहा इस मुलाकात में?
And Manish?
So there were
Sorry.
So there were reports of U.S. offering $500 million to India to enable India to diversify its defense supply chains, to move away from its overwhelming dependence on Russia for weapons. Was there some discussion in this regard between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden?
I think we'll close with that question unless there's anything else. Okay. So,
Okay. The question of Ukraine, which you mentioned, as I mean, I'll again repeat to you that the questions of regional and global importance did come up for discussion during the Quad deliberations, and there was a general understanding, and all the countries present in the room discussed their perspectives of the situation in Ukraine, and there was a general and good appreciation of the position that India has taken with regard to Ukraine, which has been that immediate cessation of hostilities and path of dialogue and diplomacy to resolve the situation. I think on that it was very clear. There was no element of doubt in terms of each country's perspective on the situation in Ukraine. The leaders also focused considerably on the question of the derivative problems which emerge out of developments in Ukraine. These would include, for example, the problems of shortages of food, fertilizer, energy, for example, to disruption in supply chains, partly because in these areas, partly in some other areas, and how when you talk of building resilient and reliable supply chains in the region, you are essentially referring to the things so that you can address this cascade of issues which emerged out of Ukraine. And Prime Minister Modi very clearly emphasized that it is important to look at the situation in Ukraine, but it is also equally important to look at the problems of the food security, energy security, humanitarian issues that have been emerging because of the situation in Ukraine. And Prime Minister also emphasized the extensive aid and assistance that Government of India has provided to Ukraine. हिंदी वाला प्रश्न मुझे दोबारा आप रिपीट कर सकते हैं? हाँ, मैं थोड़ा
आरेंद्र हूँ, डीडी न्यूज से। मेरा सवाल ये था कि ऑस्ट्रेलिया के नए प्रधानमंत्री के साथ में भारत की पहली मुलाकात।
जी, ऑस्ट्रेलिया के नए प्रधानमंत्री और भारत के प्रधानमंत्री श्री मोदी जी की पहली औपचारिक वार्ता बहुत ही गर्मजोशी से भरपूर, बहुत ही सौहार्दपूर्ण वातावरण से भरपूर और एक सकारात्मक वार्ता हर दिशा में, एक प्रकार से मैं कहूँगा द्विपक्षीय संबंधों के जितने भी आयाम हैं हर पक्ष पे लगभग बहुत ही सकारात्मक वार्ता हुई। प्रधानमंत्री जी ने ऑस्ट्रेलिया के नए प्रधानमंत्री को उनके इलेक्शन विक्ट्री पे शुभकामनाएं दी, बधाई दी और ये भी कहा कि चुनाव में जीत उपरांत 24 घंटे के अंदर उनकी क्वाड में उपस्थिति अपने आप में क्वाड की महत्वता और उनकी क्वाड के प्रति प्रतिबद्धता का एक प्रत्यक्ष प्रमाण है। वार्ता, जैसे मैंने कहा, महत्वपूर्ण थी, सकारात्मक थी और लगभग द्विपक्षीय संबंधों के हर क्षेत्र पे उसकी केंद्र थी। मैं कुछ क्षेत्रों के नाम आपको बता भी सकता हूँ। एजुकेशन, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, पीपल टू पीपल टाइज एंड कल्चर, स्पोर्ट्स, renewable energy, and manufacturing partnership in the field of defense. Naturally, trade, technology and investment, which is a standard pool for it. ये स्पष्ट था कि आज की वार्ता के उपरांत ऑस्ट्रेलिया के नए नेतृत्व और भारत के प्रधानमंत्री जी के बीच में एक बहुत ही सकारात्मकता, प्रेम भाव, मित्रता के भाव का एक संबंध स्थापित हुआ है और हमें पूर्ण विश्वास है कि आगे आने वाले महीनों और समयों में हम इसको और मजबूती की तरफ से ले जाएंगे और सकारात्मक बनाएंगे अपनी तरफ से. Defense supplies, India-US talks, I think there was this one question. As I mentioned to you, the question of India-US defense partnership did come up in discussions between India and in Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, but it was very clear, the focus of the discussion was on defense manufacturing by the American companies in India under the framework of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. Prime Minister Modi extended a warm and a strong invite to the US industry to come to India, participate in co-development, co-design, co-manufacture, even absolute manufacturing under the Make in India program and the Atmanirbhar Bharat. The focus was on defense manufacturing in India under the rubric of defense.
So thank you. Just since we are in Tokyo, for the benefit of our friends on the Hindi questions, if you permit, I would like to just give a small summary of it for that. On the Hindi question. The question was about the first meeting between the Australian Prime Minister and our Prime Minister, and Foreign Secretary mentioned this was the first official meeting. It was a very constructive, very positive meeting. Prime Minister congratulated the Australian Prime Minister on the election victory, and the fact that within 24 hours his presence here in Tokyo indicated not just the importance of the Quad, but also the Prime Minister of Australia's commitment to the Quad, as well as all issues were discussed. Foreign Secretary read out some of the important issues which are also captured in the press release that we have issued, so I won't repeat that here. But primarily that this was an opportunity for the new leadership of Australia and our Prime Minister to have a very constructive and friendly relationship was established in this meeting, and there is a commitment to even deepen this very strong partnership that we have with Australia. With that, we'll close this press conference. Thank you very much for your presence here. Good evening.